Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Truth Defender podcast. We are coming to you from the greatest country in the world, deep in the heart of the Lone Star State, Dallas, Texas. I am your host, Paul Aguilar. We really appreciate you guys stopping in. If you guys are watching us on YouTube and you aren't already a subscriber, please make sure that y'all subscribe and hit that bell icon as well. Also, hit that thumbs up button as well. It would really help us out. If you guys are watching us on the go or you want to check us out on the go, you can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, as well as iHeartRadio at Truth Defender Podcast. If you guys want to follow us on social media, we have everything linked down below. You can find us on Twitter at Defender Podcast, Instagram at Truth Defender Podcast, as well as Facebook, Rumble, and Discord. If you guys have any questions for myself or comments for myself or our guests, you can send us an email to thetruthDefender1776@gmail.com. Our next guest has had over 25 years of experience in Mexico as a student, an employee for a large multinational corporation, and as an owner of an imports business. Founded in 1999, Sueños Latin American Imports. In addition to his MBA and BBA, Robert holds an MA in Latin American Studies from the University of New Mexico. You can find both of his books on Amazon, Mexico Unexplained, The Magic Mysteries and Miracles of Mexico, and Mexican Monsters, The Cryptids and Legendary Creatures of Mexico, which we have right here. Started reading, which is great. You can also find his books on his website, which will link you over to Amazon as well, mexicounexplained.com. Please welcome, without further ado, Robert Bitto. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you coming on. Like I mentioned, I recently purchased the book and I'm a little bit more than halfway through it. My dad as well. He really enjoys it. So
Okay.
where are you actually located right now?
I'm in the borderlands. I'm in San Diego.
Okay.
So yeah, central San Diego.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So we're originally from El Paso, Texas. So we're originally from West Texas. So we're right there on the border as well. So when you said that you were actually going to school in New Mexico, I was just like, well, it's right down the street from us there. Las Cruces would probably be the closest one to El Paso from there. So yeah, that's great. But like I mentioned, I've been reading the book and reading a lot of stories from out there, a lot of familiar stories, a lot of stuff that I've actually heard of as well, growing up on the border. A lot of things like La Llorona and stuff like that. Those are all like stories. If you grew up on the border, you know all about that, especially in Mexico as well. And I wanted to kind of focus on the few topics there when it comes to monsters on the border. But I guess since you're up in San Diego, how did that kind of thing come about? Like did you visit Mexico growing up, or how did that whole thing start for you?
Well, it goes way back. When I was a student in Mexico, I heard different stories. That was well over 30 years ago.
Okay.
And then I got a job working in Mexico City. And I traveled throughout the country when I was stationed with that American company down there. And then in 1999, I started my imports business, and that caused me to travel throughout Mexico, even into the deeper countryside, the smaller towns. And once you get really deep into Mexico, then you hear things that really don't ever leave Mexico.
Yeah.
And so over the years, having this business, I've accumulated all of these stories. And I remember when I was on a plane leaving Guadalajara and I was getting into my seat with the magazine called Muy Interesante. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Sure.
It's like the big paranormal magazine in Mexico. And I was looking at this article about crop circles. And I was thinking to myself, some of these crop circles I've never seen before, and the commentary from the scientists in Mexico, I've never heard their angle on this. And then I began to think, I've had all of these experiences in Mexico and come across all of these anomalies and weird stories and things. And I thought, this would be really good fodder for a book or a podcast or a YouTube show or something. And then so about 5.5 years ago, I started the the YouTube show and podcast called Mexico Unexplained.
Right.
And then I've developed 2 books from that, and a 3rd book is coming out this year. So
Okay.
that's how that all started. It's mostly from my business and going to these little tiny places and then, hearing a story, and I'm, talking to taxi drivers and asking around and stuff like that. And that's how you find out. And a lot of the stuff that I talk about is only in Spanish,
Right.
and I'm bringing it to the English speaking world. A lot of it for the first time.
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely like growing up, you hear stories like my grandparents, they come out of Chihuahua, so that's kind of their area. And we would
Mhm.
always go out to Chihuahua for like family reunions every year. And it was like a big thing. And like my cousins that were local there, they would tell us stories about things because they lived like out on a ranch. So it was like this real
Mhm.
big ranch, and they lived out there. And like you would just hear all kinds of crazy stories about witches at night and just like weird monsters you would find like in the mountains out there. And I mean, growing up at that time, I don't know, I probably was like in middle school, but like you would hear these stories and you get freaked out, especially staying out there for like a week. But for them, it was just kind of normal. It's just stuff that they would see. And then,
Mhm.
my dad, he had a bunch of stories when his parents brought them over from Mexico. They lived in a small town called Tornillo out here in West Texas, and they had a ranch out there as well. And they're just like stories that you would hear about witches that would turn back into humans after being like owls, and just all kinds of crazy, crazy stories that that you would hear. Because I've actually relayed these stories to other people, and they're just like, man, that's crazy, and you can just tell that they don't believe it. Like when I'm telling them the story, but I mean, these stories are coming down from like my great grandfather and stuff like that. So it's definitely some crazy stuff out there that it's. I mean, I guess maybe not so much anymore. I don't know if you can probably speak to that. Is it still happening like on a regular basis, or is it just kind of stories that you just really don't hear anymore too much?
Oh, they're still very much alive, these stories. And I take one example, let's say the lechuza. You mentioned a witch that turns into an owl. That's a big story in northern Mexico, especially. And then in parts of the Southwest, like the Rio Grande Valley of Texas,
Right.
supposedly this gigantic owl appears. And then if you shoot it and it dies, then it turns into a haggard old woman. And it was really a woman to begin with. You know, that I think is my most popular cryptid that I've ever talked about. And I get messages on a weekly basis. In fact, right before I started this show, probably about 20 minutes before I logged on to Zoom,
Right.
some guy contacted me and said that he saw a lechuza, and he saw it when he was younger, and it always showed up when he was messing around with his friends doing bad stuff that they shouldn't have been doing.
Right.
But I hear all the time people who, contact me and say they've had a sighting of this or that or the other thing, Llorona or whatever. And so these are not things of the past necessarily. I think they're very much alive. And then that brings us to a question, then, are they real?
Right.
If they're still here, if your great grandfather told you a legend that someone's telling me about 20 minutes ago, what does that mean exactly?
Right. Yeah,
That's
somewhere down the
that's a
line.
question.
Yeah, definitely is a question. It's I mean, like, so growing up on the border, we had Juarez is like right across from El Paso. So it's you would have like we used to have friends that would come to high school here in the States, so they would cross over in the morning and they go to school, and then after school they go back home. And
Right.
it was a lot of stories of like, I don't know. I mean, right there next to the border in El Paso, it's Juarez is like the big city, but once you leave Juarez out the other end, it's kind of like desert, just all desert for miles,
Yeah,
and
it's
it's just
desolate.
yeah, there's nothing
Yeah.
out there really, um, for like a few hours. But they would all live. A lot of them, they were like poor and stuff like that, but they lived out there, like in the mountains. You could see from my front yard, if you were to look off to the right hand side, you could see like, I don't know, I want to say about 200 yards. You would see the border wall, and you could see over the fence, and you could see all the people living out there and stuff. But um,
Right.
yeah, they would come out with these crazy stories about witches. I don't know if you had seen a few years back. It was I want to say it wasn't on Univision, but it was like another Mexican station where they had the news that there was a witch that had actually attacked like two police officers. That was like one of the big stories a few years back. And
Right.
they
Right.
had they had them on the news and stuff, but it's just
Yeah, I've actually talked about that story. It's in
right,
the book too.
right,
It's that specific story. Yeah, the witch or the creature, whatever it was, attacked the police car and like almost tore the roof off of it.
right.
And they were calling it the Bruja de Guadalupe or the man bat
Okay,
because they were thinking that it was a gigantic bat, but it was like it was in the shape of a person. Then people said no, it was a witch. Yeah, so that was a pretty crazy story. And that just happened within this century. So it would happened, I think like 15 years ago or something.
right.
So yeah, these are not things of the past. They're still with us. And you were speaking about the desolation. And if you fly into central Mexico, let's say you're flying down to Guadalajara or Mexico City, you're flying over this country that is mostly uninhabited.
Yeah,
So, and the mountains and everything. And so people have sighted creatures, you know, um, and all this assorted other stuff. There's plenty of room for stuff to exist, even whether it's legend or you believe that these things are interdimensional or whatever. There is room, I think, for undiscovered animals. There's a certain type of wildcat, for example, that is in the Sierras that it's called the Mexican onza, that they think is a holdover from the Ice Age, that it was a cheetah, a
mhm,
prehistoric cheetah that went extinct, but still exists in Mexico in the remote areas. So you have a lot of empty space where there's a lot of stuff that can be going on.
yeah.
So yeah.
There's definitely yeah. It's crazy. Actually having driven from like out of El Paso into Juarez, and then we would actually take the bus all the way out to Chihuahua. You're just staring at desert for like hundreds of miles, and there's nothing out there. It's yeah. I mean, who knows what's still out there? If there's nobody living out there, I mean, that doesn't mean that it's completely empty. There's something out there, like in the mountains or whatever. But I mean, so I guess one of like the major ones that I wanted to really speak about was the black-eyed children. Because they have stories about black-eyed children here in the States. They have them like overseas, like like other countries and stuff. But I had never heard of black-eyed children in Mexico. I'm sure it's happened, but I had just never heard stories about that ever.
Yeah, and that's very interesting because that's only been happening for the past 15 or 20 years. And some people in Mexico say it's un gran psicosis. It's like a great, like a psychosis, or what do you call it? A like mass
Yes,
hallucination
yeah.
or something like that. And um, a lot of people blame the United States. Well, in Mexico, that happens a lot. Just
All
blame
the
the
time.
United States for it. Oh, there's an earthquake, blame the United States.
Yeah.
No, and so the black-eyed children, oh, those are gringos, I even heard in Mexico someone tell me that those black-eyed kids were created in a lab. And that was in an area actually where they had several sightings of these kids. But they've been sighted in the Yucatan, in the state of Colima, and then on the border, just right across the border from me here in San Diego and Tijuana.
Right.
So they've been around the country, and people have a lot of theories about them, and you can readily look that up on the internet because, like you said, it's a worldwide phenomenon, but it's only been recently, described in Mexico. They haven't been there for a while, but the black-eyed kid phenomenon is fairly recent in the world anyway, I think. I mean, maybe it goes back 50 years,
Right.
possibly,
Right.
but in Mexico, it's a lot more recent than that. And it's the same thing. And they speak Spanish. It's,
Mm.
perfect Spanish. Podemos entrar. They always ask for permission to come in. And then, it's the same deal. But
Yeah.
there's what I have found is that there is a component for everything in Mexico that we know as paranormal. Like there's a Bigfoot creature, there's a Loch Ness monster creature, there's a Bermuda Triangle. It seems like every paranormal thing has its own little special Mexican version.
Right.
So, yeah,
That
that a
makes,
lot of people don't know about.
yeah, I mean, that would make sense. But the whole fact, so I guess when it's worldwide, I had never heard of any black-eyed children outside of the US besides like the UK, or I've
Mhm.
heard maybe like a story or two in Brazil, but it was never like they would pick up the language or like they would take the language. They would still be speaking English or stuff. I mean, one of the stories that I heard was in New Orleans was like the last one that I had heard. Um, but it wasn't like at a house. There was a lady trying to go to the store or something like that. She was in her car and she looked in the back seat and there was like a little kid in the back seat. But when she jumped out of the car to open the door, she was gone. It was just one of those crazy stories like that. But she described, she had black eyes and all that stuff. But um, that's just weird that it would take on the language, because all the stories that I had ever heard about them, they never spoke like the local like language or anything. It was just all English, the whole time. So that's definitely creepy. Creepier, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's, yeah, but like you said, that's fairly recent. I had never heard of any kind of stories about black-eyed children in Mexico like ever growing up or anything. So it would probably, it's obviously like a new thing, but why would they cross borders and start to go into Mexico and stuff like that? So that's definitely
But the whole psychosis thing, there could be something to that too, because we see that with the chupacabra,
right.
because that didn't exist in Mexico until the show Christina
Yeah.
from, I guess she's on Univision or one of the big, pan Latin American networks. Who I'm talking about,
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
talk show host, the Cuban woman with the mustard colored hair,
Yep.
and she first brought that on her show, and she was mostly talking about the Caribbean, Puerto Rico,
Right.
the Puerto Rican chupacabra. Then all of a sudden, after that show aired, people started seeing this creature in Mexico. Now, was it part of some sort of great psychosis or whatever? Or did people feel now that they had the permission to talk about stuff like this? Was it always there? You know, I don't know. But you don't hear about the chupacabra anymore. Not much, not like it
No.
used to be in the mid or late 90s. But
Yeah.
when things are talked about, it seems like they appear. And in Tibet, there's a whole phenomenon called the tulpa, where it's a thought form that comes to life.
Yeah.
And so there are a couple of instances at the beginning of 2020, like it was in March or April. There was a town that in Mexico, and I did a show about it. Um, there was a town in Mexico that the whole town thought that they were seeing werewolves, and psychologists thought that it was because of the pandemic lockdown, and people were, on edge, and they, you know, didn't know what was going on, and they were fearing the unknown.
Right.
And one person said they saw a werewolf, and then that just kind of caught on. And there really wasn't a werewolf, but then there were photographs of tracks and stuff like that. And so, you know, there are different possible explanations about how these creatures manifest.
Right.
Are they real? Are people just seeing things? Is it a collective unconscious that's coming to life? There are a lot of different questions, And I was talking to another podcast host last month, and we both agreed, hey, sometimes it's good to just wonder and not have answers, because some of these, I don't, what is the answer to the black-eyed kids, for example?
Right.
What are they? I mean, people have been asking that question and questions of other things for a long time. And
Right.
what are we going to do? What answers can we get? I
Yeah.
don't think we can.
And I guess we could speak to the whole mass psychosis thing. So like they had that whole Slender Man thing that was going around here,
Right.
for a while. Obviously, it was something that was started on the internet and stuff like that. But after like a year or so, they had like kids saying that they were seeing it and stuff. They even had that case, I forgot where, but there was two little girls that like lured one of their friends over to the house, and then they both murdered her because they said that the Slender Man showed up and said that they had to kill her and stuff like that. So, I mean, it could be one of those things where you put so much thought into it, and you think about it so much that you just wish it into existence, or things like that. But that one is definitely, I guess, one of the more recent ones. That, I mean, that was like 2 years ago when that happened or so. But yeah, I mean, I guess if enough people think about it, or they think that they see it, I guess they just make it like out of their mind, and it just shows up. So yeah, and it's, especially if they don't exist prior, and then all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of people seeing them, and a lot of claims that people talk to them, or like they show up at their house and stuff. So yeah, there's a whole lot of questions that I wish we had answers to, but then I kind of think like, maybe we should just leave them the way they are, because I don't want to be given like the answer and be like, well, it was just like a joke, or this and that. But yeah, I think I'm with you on that one as well. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I found interesting, so giants in Mexico, I had never heard of stories about giants in Mexico. Can you go into that?
Well, yeah, it's really interesting. We have in the United States stories of giants too. The early settlers, Anglo-American settlers crossing the continent and then finding bones and things like that. The same thing happened in Mexico with the Spanish when they first arrived. They found supposed evidence of giant bones, and there was even one account that I read in Spanish from an archival source in Spain, where a guy got a land grant in central Mexico, and he found giant bones, and he sent them back to the king of Spain. And so the king of Spain was supposedly aware of this stuff.
Right.
But there's something going on with the bones and with ancient mysteries in general in Mexico. The same thing that's happened here. Like I said, there's always a component in Mexico. There's always something that's very similar to what we have going on in the United States. In the United States, we've had the Smithsonian and other organizations like that putting the lid on forbidden archaeology, so to say, bones that are out of whack, out of sequence, whatever. And you've heard of that, I'm sure.
Right.
And your listeners probably have heard of the Smithsonian. But in Mexico, they have the National Institute of Anthropology and History out of Mexico City. In every state, there's at least one field office. And if something's ever discovered, they go out there, and depending on what it is, sometimes they will shut down the place. Like in Guanajuato, in the state of Guanajuato, in the southeastern corner of it, there's a little town called Acámbaro, and I've been there. And I've been to the dinosaur figurine museum there, the Waldemar Julsrud Museum, where they've unearthed a lot of these figurines that are of dinosaurs, and they have humans with the dinosaurs. And the National Institute of Anthropology and History went into that area and said, no more digs. We're not going to give you any more permits for digs.
Yep. Can't have that.
So they will put they'll put the lid on things just like the Smithsonian does here or used to do. I mean, you've heard stories of finding giant bones or armor from medieval knights or something, and then they get dumped into the ocean. Well, it's the same thing down there. They have this tight control. And I think in Mexico, it's even a tighter control because there's just more stuff down there.
Right.
If you think about all the civilizations for thousands of years, complex civilizations, there's a lot more potentially to hide from the public. And so the giants, back to what you originally were saying, they supposedly have uncovered bones, and there's a history, in the mythology or the oral history of some of the people down there that giants did exist. Like the city of Teotihuacan was supposedly built by giants, according to the Aztecs or the Mexica
Right.
people. And then there was one story, and I talked about it in my book, about a real living giant that the conquistadors actually came across, and he was like 10 feet tall. And when they were trying to conquer, I believe, Tlatelolco, one of the towns just north of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital on the same island,
Right.
there was this giant who was fighting on the guy throwing watermelon-sized boulders, and he kept the Spanish at bay for a couple of days. And then so that's one of their historical accounts of a real giant that
Right.
they actually came into contact with. But is that somebody who was suffering from gigantism, someone who was just a super tall person, or was it part of a lost race? So there are stories in ancient Mexico about the lost race of giants. And people say that that's who built the big cities, the pyramids and things. But I'm inclined to be a little skeptical about that, because if you've ever been to Mexico and been to those pyramids, maybe the giants constructed them, but they didn't construct them for themselves, because
Right.
those staircases, they are they're small, they're narrow for, the steps are not that wide.
Right.
They're like for someone who has an adult size men's shoe of like a 7 or
Okay.
something, like a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old in modern times, a small footed person, which if you look to the indigenous of Mexico, they tend to be 5 feet tall or so on average, with, the corresponding dimensions for their feet and hands and everything. So if the giants really built those cities, then the cities themselves would be for bigger people. The doorways wouldn't be so low, the stairs wouldn't be so small. But then other people will counter that. I said that once on a show, and then the host said, but maybe these pyramids were built by the giants, and then since a lot of these ruins are built on top of older ruins, the people came, the Toltecas or whoever, and then just put their facade over the pyramid, their next layer, and that next layer had the steps that were human sized. So that could be an explanation too. There are a lot of maybes here with everything, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely odd that you know y- there's like a lost race of giants. I mean, there seems to be a lot of lost races of all kinds of people in Mexico. I mean, Aztecs just up and disappeared as well, and just like seemingly into thin air. Really, they didn't really kind of leave any kind of like clues as to what happened at that time. Like where they went. I mean, there's obviously still like Aztec people that are from the Aztec gene or whatever still alive in Mexico. But I mean, it just seems like the whole race just kind of disappeared one day, and then nobody knows what happened to them, along with other people like in Mexico as well, right? So it's
Right. There are a lot of civilizations that just kind of stopped.
yeah,
And the ancient Maya, that's the big civilization that, you know, the civilization collapsed. No one understands why. There are lots of theories. Then There are other places like Teotihuacan, the big ruins that are outside of Mexico City, just to the northeast. That civilization, they had no writing. Um, it's hard to understand what really happened there. There was a big fire at one point, and then the city and the whole society basically collapsed. And the Toltecs also, they mysteriously disappeared. So are these just civilizational collapses, or did something happen, and what was that? And a lot of it is up for grabs as far as explanations go. We don't really know.
It's odd that it's just concentrated around that, like that region of Mexico. I mean, you have other civilizations around the world, even up through the Americas and stuff that they, I mean, they're no longer here if they were here before, but for the most part, I mean, there's still like ancestors that were still there, and you have stories of what happened to the people, like all the
Mhm.
Native Americans here, like where all the tribes were, where they went through, but it's just like that one area, like in Mexico, not even just one area, but like the whole state of Mexico. It's just everybody that was in there before, they're just gone. Like, I don't know, like out of nowhere. It's weird. It just makes you like wonder, is it just because there's pyramids there and that has something to do with it? I mean, do you have pyramids in Egypt, and I forgot where the other set of like the major pyramids are around the world as well, but there's only like three major areas, right? But I mean, the people of Egypt as well, I mean, they're for the most part still there. It's just in Mexico that you just don't see them anymore. It's just odd.
Yeah, there are many theories. You can go as wild as you want. When there's no certainty, you can fill in the blanks with anything. And
Sure.
there are a lot of groups out there, like especially with the Toltecs. The Toltecs were a civilization that was before the Aztecs, but was after the Olmecs. So they were like the big kids on the block about 1,000 years ago, like 800 AD to 1,000 to 1100 AD. And they didn't leave behind any writing, so we can't read what they wrote. Um, and they mysteriously disappeared. They collapsed. We don't know much about their religion. We can only guess from paintings and art left behind that are very similar to other cultures in ancient Mexico. But because we don't know much about it, in the 60s and 70s, there was this Toltec spirituality movement that got off the ground that turned into the new age sort of stuff. And it was mostly co-opted by Americans, non-Hispanic Americans. And even to this day, there are a lot of charlatans and scam artists in Mexico who say, yeah, I'm a Toltec shaman. I'm a medicine man of the Toltecs. And, my great grandfather and my great, 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 whatever, this is a history that goes back thousands of years. It's all not true.
Right.
But what they're doing is they're filling in the blanks.
Right.
There are a lot of blanks. We have a lot of questions. So you can say whatever you want. You could say they're aliens, they went underground, whatever. You could say all of this stuff. And some people make a business out of it, unfortunately, scamming gringos who don't know any better. So
Sure. How much of what we see now in Mexico when it comes to like cryptids and demons and ghosts is, you think, from like the Aztec times and like the Mayan times where, they actually sacrifice like thousands of people and things like that. And even nowadays you have like black magic and stuff like that in Mexico, and certain towns are like their local religion is to like the
the
Virgin Mary
Santa
dead.
Muerte.
Yeah, stuff like that. I mean, how much of that plays into it?
Well, um, a lot of these beliefs, as far as cryptids, legendary creatures, whatever, a lot of them go way, way back.
Right.
We talked about the black-eyed children. That's recent. Chupacabras is recent. But then you have things like the Tilanchana, which is this mermaid creature that lives in the lakes and some rivers in central Mexico. That that story goes back at least 2,000 years. There's stories about the Bigfoot creatures. Those go back to before the Spanish. The lake monster that supposedly lived in Lake Texcoco around the capital city of the Aztecs, that goes way, way back too. So a lot of these things go deep into history, and there's a lot of history in Mexico. Complex civilizations have been in Mexico for thousands of years. So there's a lot there. And people think that Mexico is one of the most haunted places on earth because of what you're saying, the sacrifices, and because civilization has been there for a long time. And it's interesting to note that I did a show on exorcisms in Mexico. The Catholic Church will admit officially, coming from the Vatican in Rome, will admit it officially that there are more exorcisms in Mexico than in any other country on earth,
Right.
even though it's not the most populous Catholic country. The the country with the most Catholics is Brazil, but in Mexico there are more exorcisms by far than any other place. So what's that? Is that also part of the gran psychosis? Is that just mass hysteria again, or is there something really going on? And a couple of popes, Pope Benedict XVI specifically went to Mexico to address the issues related to the Santa Muerte and Jesus Malverde, worshiping of these folk saints that have nothing to do with Catholicism.
Right.
So, and those two folk saints, especially the Santa Muerte, those are the worship of those folk saints are growing in popularity, and the Catholic Church really can't do anything about it. And people are gravitating towards those saints because they feel that times are so tough, the situation is so dire that the regular Catholic saints can't handle it. So they go to like the darker side. The Santa Muerte looks like the Grim Reaper. You're very familiar with that image, I'm sure. And it looks like the Grim Reaper, and it's female, and she has all of these powers. Now, what Catholic church or what Catholic saint can you go to put a curse on somebody? No, nobody.
Yeah.
But the Santa Muerte, you can say prayers and give her offerings and stuff, and she can curse someone for you. She can get revenge for you against someone else. So these are very powerful things that people are believing in because the church has failed them. And like I said, there have been a couple of visits by popes to Mexico just to address this worship of, let's say, the darker spirits. But I got to be careful because I'll get into trouble because people will say to me, and people have contacted me and say, why are you putting like this negative spin on the Santa Muerte? She's beautiful. She's powerful. She comes into my heart. You know, people are really into this stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, so maybe we should back off on being judgmental about it or whatever.
Sure.
But, you know, they're very powerful and they're growing in power.
Right.
So,
No, it's definitely one of those things where, I mean, growing up in Mexican household, it, religion, especially for the older generations, like, my grandmother, especially, like they get into it, obviously, like we were Catholic growing up and you had to be like super religious. We were always at church. We were always there every week. My grandmother didn't let anybody skip. We all had to be there, even when we all moved out. We would do
always the Nana does that
we
all
were,
the time, right?
even when we
Always
were all
count
like,
on
we were all like spread out, we would all still have to like come on the weekends. Hey, here, you coming to church because your grandma wants you here this weekend for church. I'm just like, well, I'm like working. I got stuff to do. I have my own family now. Like I have to go back and, but yeah, I mean, I can see how people, especially that live in those areas, they would just get really into it because it's just a part of their life every day. I mean, I know how that goes, so it would be real easy for them to attach to something like that and they would just take off running with it. And there's nothing you can do to change their minds, especially if they start to see in their own mind some kind of fortune off of that. Like they get something here and there, maybe they get a little money here and there, whatever. And it's because they prayed the night before, then they're just going to keep going. It's going to keep reaffirming them, and it's going to get out of hand, which obviously it has. But yeah, but it's just crazy that the popes, have to go all the way to Mexico just for that. And, but
Well, and like I mentioned briefly, it's the situation in Mexico has gotten a lot tougher. I
yeah,
mean, since I've been going down there, I've been going down there regularly for business for well over 20 years. And like I said at the beginning, I lived in Mexico in 1995, also in 1989, when I was a student first in college. And it's gotten, especially in the rural areas that are affected by the cartels.
right.
So where you have the cartels controlling the countryside of where you live, and all of these things, bad things are happening around you. The Catholic Church isn't going to cut it. You need something more powerful.
Yeah,
And that's they're turning to these folk saints that some people would consider to be very dark forces, because they need that power, because the world around them is terrible.
right.
So
And it's definitely so. I mean, I guess when Bill Clinton was in office way back when, in El Paso, there where I was at, there was this whole thing in Juarez where they were like kidnapping women like
mhm,
all the time, and they were
still
murdering
going on.
them, and
Yeah.
I think they had found like 400 to 500 of them like in graves out in the desert. And it was like this big thing that was going on at that time, that women were scared to go out at night because they were just taking them like clockwork every day, and
Mhm,
they just would never see them again. um, but that was going on just right across the border from where I was, and it was like a
mhm,
big thing because we had a lot of family out there still, and like a lot of friends in Juarez and stuff, and it was pretty rough for a while, and then that whole thing kind of died down, and it started getting better, and kind of when I was coming up through high
mhm,
school and like in the late 90s, we used to go over to Juarez like Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, like to go drink and stuff, and that was just what we did.
mhm,
But then, kind of like when I got to high school and stuff, like early 2000s is when it started picking up again really bad. And now you have like you mentioned, the cartels not just out like in the rural areas anymore, but they're coming into the cities now,
oh yeah.
taking over whole like whole sections and stuff. So it's getting a lot worse. I mean, I don't know what can be done at this point. I don't think anything, but yeah, that definitely feeds
Well, they
into.
have their elections coming up in June. I mean, I don't know if you listen to Mexican radio. I'm into the 80s music and stuff like that,
Sure.
because that's what I grew up with. And there's a radio station from out of Tecate that I listen to all the time here on the American side. And gosh, the political ads are just crazy right now,
Hmm.
because there's an election coming up in the first week of June. And so there's a lot at stake, and it's the same rhetoric that we've heard on this side of the border. This is the most important election we've ever had in our history.
Right.
And yeah, so there's a lot of there's a lot on the line in Mexico right now. That country could be the richest country on earth. It
Yeah.
has incredible natural resources. I mean, it's amazing, but the politics and everything, and just the whole social situation down there right now, eh, it's really hindering any sort of progress, and it's sad. So we'll see
Yeah.
what happens in June.
It's definitely sad that we like like I mentioned, we used to go every year for family reunions and stuff, and at some point I don't even remember when we just had to stop going, which is really sad because I really enjoyed it. It's a beautiful country,
Mhm,
that's where we're from and stuff, or that's where my grandparents were from, but like it just stopped being somewhere that we could just go and have fun. It's sad, that we can't go back anymore like we used to, and I really wish we could, but yeah, it's definitely pretty rough. But oh well, what can we do? Um, but yeah, so I guess one of like the main I guess there's two more here that I wanted to kind of touch on. The Black Demon I found really interesting. Can you kind of go into a little more about that one?
Yeah, it's supposedly a 35-foot long shark that exists in the Gulf of California, also called the Sea of Cortez. That's the body of water that is in the Pacific Ocean, and it goes up in between Baja, the Baja Peninsula, and then what they call the mainland, even though it's connected to the mainland of Mexico, the peninsula is.
Right.
But it's in the Sea of Cortez. It's been spotted for a couple of decades, and some people believe that it's a holdover of a megalodon, the gigantic prehistoric shark. And so there's been a lot of there've been a few investigations into this, and all that has really come up is anecdotal stories and then evidence of seals or boats and stuff just
Right.
totally shredded. And so, and eyewitness accounts and things like that, but they haven't found a body. um they haven't found any other sort of physical evidence. It's kind of like Bigfoot.
Right.
Where's the physical evidence?
Yeah.
But so yeah, that's very interesting because people have claimed to have seen megalodon, the prehistoric gigantic shark, in other parts of the world, like off of South Africa.
Right.
So it could be possible that this is a creature that still exists. I mean, the oceans are totally unexplored, pretty much. So
Yeah.
it could be out there.
I always find it interesting how we search, we spend like billions of dollars searching for life, like out there somewhere on like other planets and stuff, but
Hmm.
nobody's ever gone under the like in the ocean way down there. And there's stuff that we haven't discovered down there either. I think we're looking in the wrong spot. We need to look inwards and not outwards. Yeah. And then so I guess like one of like the main ones we'll close up on here is the Mummies of Guanajuato. What is that all about there?
Well, those are actually real mummies. There were people who were interred in cemeteries in Guanajuato because of the if you I don't know if you've ever been to Guanajuato. It's one of the most beautiful places in Mexico. I could live there. It's the climate is kind of like San Diego. It's like 72 degrees year round, and it's fairly dry. There are conditions in the soil and also the humidity, the temperature that preserved, real people. These are real, people who were interred, and they couldn't pay, the families couldn't pay their taxes on the burial because the burial tax your family has to pay for like 100 years.
Damn.
They stopped doing that. They stopped doing that, I think, in the 50s, but they were saying, up, you didn't pay your burial tax on your great grandmother, so we're going to have to move her body. And when they were doing that, when they were opening the tombs of these people, digging them up, they were perfectly preserved. So that's there's scientific explanations for that. The conditions were just perfect.
Right.
But it's part of Mexican lore. There are stories, there are movies about the momias. There's a museum there. You can buy mummy-shaped candy outside the museum. In fact, I was just there. Gosh, it was almost a year ago, uh, the end of February of last year, right before the pandemia.
Yeah.
And they've expanded the museum. It's like a big business in that town, but there are stories of some of them coming to life and the whole thing like that. But um, most of that is scientifically explained what happened to them there.
Right.
But it's a very interesting thing to look at.
Yeah. How widespread is La Llorona? Because I mean, obviously we have one in El Paso, but I'm sure there's like one story pretty much everywhere throughout Mexico. Do you
Right.
find that?
It's a standard story, and that's one people always ask me, of all of these things you write about, have you ever seen any of this stuff? And the Llorona is one that I have seen, or I thought I did.
Right.
When I was crossing an arroyo in New Mexico when I was a kid in Albuquerque, because the school system there is very poor, there was no money for a school bus.
Right.
So our teacher wanted to invite us over to her house at the end of the year.
Right.
So we had to take city buses to get to her house. And between bus stops, we had to cross a bridge of a dry ditch, an arroyo.
Hmm.
And the I was there with a couple of other kids, all my classmates were crossing the bridge, and one guy pointed and said, look down there. And there was a woman, an old woman. What was she doing in this ditch? She was climbing out of it. And we looked at each other. We were like, Llorona. And then we ran. We ran so fast and we were laughing while we were running because we couldn't believe what we saw. We just like kind of stumbled all over each other. I mean, it was kind of funny and interesting, but the story goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. To those listeners and watchers of your show who don't know, the 1 minute story is that it's a woman. She was very beautiful. She lived in colonial Mexico, and she married a very handsome guy who was an army guy. In some stories, he was a nobleman, like a count or something. She had 2 kids. It's always 2 kids, whatever story you have here. She had 2 kids, and she was raising the kids pretty much by herself because the husband was away. And then there were rumors around town that the husband was cheating on her. And then so she took the kids to a raging river, threw the kids into the river to try to kill them to spite her husband. And while the kids were floundering in the waters, drowning, she had second thoughts, but it was too late. So now she roams the riverbanks, the arroyos, the acequias, anywhere where there's water, and she is lurking around wanting to snatch any kids. She's looking for her own, but any other kid will do.
Right.
So that's the story, and I thought I saw her with a bunch of other witnesses.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely, yeah, like you said, it kind of varies wherever you are, but down there on the Rio, it's you just hear stories up and down everywhere, and everybody swore that they'd seen them when I was growing up and stuff. I even have some family that are cops there locally, and they have stories. And one of my cousins actually border patrol, so you can just imagine the stories he has. But um, yeah, I mean, that's just one of those like standard stories that no matter where you go throughout Mexico, you'll hear some kind of variation wherever it is. I mean, even oddly enough, out there in El Paso, there's a story or two of like Bigfoot on the border and stuff like that, which is odd. I had never heard of anything like that, actually growing up there. But there apparently is like 1 or 2 stories about it, and it's just like weird. It's weird. I mean, it's definitely weird out there in El Paso. It's like all desert. Once you try to go like west, crossing Albuquerque and stuff like that. But um, out there in the middle of nowhere, especially like in the smaller towns, like Fabians is one of those towns where it's starting to expand out that way more now. But before, when I was in high school and stuff like that, there was nothing out there. It was just like a little town, and there's desert everywhere, and just like mountains and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I had cousins who were born out there, and they grew up there and they lived there their whole lives, and they're just like things that they would see in the mountains or on the border and stuff, like crying babies at night, like in the bushes and stuff. And it's just like weird things. I don't know if it has to do with like the Mexican kind of, I don't know, like I want to say folklore, but it's just like the weird things that happen in Mexico, like with like the black magic stuff and like all the brujas and stuff. So I'm sure that has something to do with it when it comes to all these different stories out there.
Sure, if you believe in it,
Yeah.
is it real or isn't it? Like I said, earlier, it's okay to wonder. It's okay not to have answers. And I think we can't understand everything. we can try. But yeah, it sure is an interesting world, isn't it?
It's definitely interesting. It's great up to a point to where you kind of want to know about it, but you just hope that you never see anything for yourself because then you'd be scared out of your mind. I mean, because it's great to talk about them, for the most part, but do I ever want to see one of these things in person? Maybe not. I would like to know that they exist and maybe have some kind of evidence, but I don't want to be the one to find out firsthand if it actually exists. I'll let someone else do that, and then I'll come swooping in later, and we can talk about it. But yeah, it's definitely freaky. It's great too. I mean, like these stories have lasted hundreds of years in most cases, and they're just great to talk about. Especially, like I mentioned, growing up on the border, like all my friends we would all talk about it. I would talk about it with my family, and they had great stories and stuff like that. Even my dad and stuff, and it's fun. It's just fun to like hear these stories. And I'm sure one day when my son gets older, I'll tell him the same stories, and it's just going to keep going. So that's
Yeah, you have to.
yeah,
You have to. It's your obligation. You got
yeah,
to tell them these stories.
yeah. It's going to be one of like the really good things about when he gets older. But I mean, I'm just hoping one day that we finally get to, hopefully, if this whole pandemic stops or whatever, one
It's
day.
never going to end.
Yeah, but I mean, if we get to some kind of, I'm not going to say normalcy either because it's not normal to be wearing masks and all that crap. But
It'll never get back to normal.
yeah, I want to be able to.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I know.
Sorry, yeah.
We're all screwed from now on. But
No.
yeah, I would like to visit like we used to, but that's not probably not going to happen anytime soon. And you know, all those family get-togethers we used to have out there, they're all done. I mean, my grandmother, she just passed away like a few months ago, so that's not going to happen anymore because she's not here. And she was like the main person that would kind of keep that whole thing alive. And now that she's gone, it's just like the family's going to go their own way, and that's just going to be it from now on. But um, yeah, I mean, hopefully one day we get to go back out there. How often do you make it out there? Like for work and all that stuff.
Well, I've tried to go a couple times a year. The last time I could really travel was February of last year. And I had to cancel all of my 2020 trips that I had planned. And yeah, I usually go a couple times a year if I can. In the early part of my business, I was going down there a lot more often. But yeah, I try to go to the smaller, more obscure places to find products for my business,
Right.
stuff that no one else has. And as a consequence, like I said at the beginning, that's where all this came from, the whole Mexico Unexplained stuff, because I was stumbling across a lot of very interesting things that I'd never heard of before. So yeah.
Yeah. And we usually stumble out any which way, for food is probably one of the biggest reasons why we would go out there. It's just kind of what we do. My wife and stuff, we like to travel for food and stuff. And,
Mhm.
she's my wife's from the Philippines. So
Oh,
when she came to the States back in 2013, I think it was, she had never tried any kind of Mexican food whatsoever. So that was one of like the biggest joys that I had was bringing that food, to her. Now I can't
so
stop her.
now you at your house you have pancit burritos,
Fancy
right?
burrito, yeah, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's definitely like a weird thing when we get together with other people, and she brings like fried fish or whatever she takes, from her side, and then like we're bringing flautas and all kinds of stuff and
Mhm.
enchilada and stuff. So it's definitely like a weird kind of mix when people come over as well. But it's great. I mean, up until that point, she had never tried any kind of Mexican food like ever, and now it's
Oh
all about
wow.
like tacos all the time, and she wants to eat freaking gorditas and like enchiladas and stuff, and
Mhm.
it's great. So it's good for me, but then it's not because then we start putting on the poundage, so it's not good.
It's all right. It's
Yeah,
all
yeah,
good.
it's all good, especially during like this whole quarantine thing. It's what makes it worse is my wife went to school to learn how to be a chef and all that stuff, so she already knows how to cook. So
Wow.
she got together with my grandmother like once or twice and kind of
Wow.
learned all of her recipes, and now I'm lucky enough that I get to have those still. And now that she's not here, but yeah, it's definitely pretty good. We got a good deal out of it. Well, sir, I really appreciate it. That was some great stuff there. Like I said, I have your book and I really enjoyed it. I'm going to go ahead and finish it out as well this weekend. But yeah, so I guess, can you kind of let everybody know where they can find your books and your website and any other kind of like social media areas they can find you?
Yeah, sure. MexicoUnexplained.com, that has all of the shows. It has, and it's completely free. You can read any of the articles I've written for free. And through there, you can buy the book. You can get an autographed copy directly from me, or you can order from Amazon or request it using the ISB number from a local bookstore if you want. And then I'm also on YouTube, Mexico Unexplained, and Twitter, MX Unexplained, and also Facebook. So you can connect with me there. Especially, I want to hear from you if you've had experiences, and also for any sort of story ideas, because I have the right to learn too during this whole project. And sometimes, listeners and viewers of the YouTube channel will contact me and say, when I was visiting my grandma in Santa Maria del Pulque, Guanajuato, or, some little tiny town, and there's a legend there or whatever. And then I'll look into it and it'll be something amazing. Yeah. So a lot of my material comes from the people who view and watch my stuff. So I want to hear from you if you have experienced anything, or if you have something interesting you want me to look at. So yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today about this. I can go on, but
no, it's
I know we have time constraints. So yeah.
No, we'll definitely have to have you on, especially when that new book comes out. We'll set something up again, because there's other stories that I have, and I know a lot of other people have. I mean, like you said, we can go on forever, and I definitely have those stories around here somewhere that we can speak about. We'll have to do something more informal. We can just go ahead and talk about it. But yeah, so I'll go ahead and link your books and everything down below in the video on YouTube, as well as, like you mentioned, Facebook and Twitter and all that. The website as well, MexicoUnexplained.com. But we'll go ahead and do that for you. And we'll have to have you on again sometime soon. Even if it's way before the other book comes out, we can just have you on it.
Great.
Again as well. And we'll go from there. But I really appreciate your time, sir. I hope you guys stay safe out there where you're at, stay healthy as well. And hopefully we get to get back out to Mexico again sometime soon. We can all use a vacation, I think. Yeah, but I really appreciate the time. And everybody else, you guys, like I mentioned, if you guys aren't already subscribed to us on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, as well as that bell icon for us. Hit that like button as well. That'll really help us out. Like I mentioned before, if you guys are on the go and you want to catch us, you can catch us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, as well as iHeartRadio at Truth Defender Podcast. Follow us on all of our social media platforms, which we'll have linked down below, as well as Mr. Bitto's as well. And then if you guys want to have any kind of recommendations, you want to send us any kind of questions for myself or our guests, you can hit us up at thetruthDefender1776 at gmail.com. So for everybody out there, I hope you guys stay safe, stay healthy, stay blessed, and definitely stay frosty, everybody. Have a great one.